paradrama tales.
He walked in 20 minutes late. Didn't say hello, didn't look up, and asked me to tell me about yourself while scrolling through his phone. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't an interview, it was a warning, and I wasn't going to ignore it. It was supposed to be a turning point, a senior position at a well-established mid-sized company, offering everything I'd worked toward for over a decade: leadership responsibility, strategic influence, a meaningful bump in pay. When the recruiter first contacted me, I remember standing in my kitchen, coffee in hand, staring at the job description like it was written for me. I had the experience, the education, the track record, and more importantly, I had the hunger. This wasn't just a step up. It was supposed to be the role that finally matched my effort with the title I'd earned in every way, except officially. The company had a polished reputation online. Strong Glassdoor reviews, solid press presence, even a mission statement that aligned with my own values. People first, innovation-led, growth-focused. I imagined walking into their office with confidence, maybe even starting to mentally draft my 90-day plan before the interview ever began. The recruiter was friendly, encouraging, and gave me every reason to believe this would be a smooth process. I did my homework, printed extra resumes, picked out a tailored outfit, and blocked off my calendar. Walking into their lobby that day, everything looked the part: modern interiors, welcoming receptionist, calm buzz of a productive workplace. I sat there rehearsing answers in my head, nerves dancing somewhere between excitement and hope. I was ready to prove I belonged. But when the minutes ticked past the scheduled interview time, 5, 10, then 20, and no one came to greet me, I started to feel the first twinge of doubt. Still, I gave grace. People run late, meetings run over. It happens. But I never imagined that the very person who would be my direct senior, the one whose leadership I'd be working under, would stroll in without eye contact, without apology, and make it abundantly clear from the first second that I wasn't worth his time. What do you do when the role of your dreams starts with a red flag you can't unsee? For me, it was a wake-up call, because it's not just about what the job pays or what the title says, it's about who you're expected to follow, and respect, I learned, is non-negotiable. 20 minutes doesn't sound like much until you're the one sitting there watching each second stretch into a quiet verdict. At first, I told myself not to read too much into it. Maybe he got caught in traffic. Maybe a meeting ran late. I even smiled politely at the receptionist when she checked on me, assuring her it was fine. But as the clock ticked past the 10-minute mark, then 15, then 20, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just the wait, it was what the wait meant. I've been on the other side of that table. I've hired people. I've sat in interviews where someone's time, energy, and preparation were treated with care. Being late happens, but how you arrive says everything. And when he finally walked in, it was like he was still somewhere else. No eye contact, no apology. Just a distracted nod and a motion toward the chairs, like I was interrupting his day. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't acknowledge the delay. He didn't even introduce himself. Instead, he flopped into his chair, leaned back with his phone in hand, and asked me to go ahead and tell him about myself without ever looking up. His thumbs were scrolling. I don't know what he was reading. Emails, texts, Twitter, my resume, he would later claim. But in that moment, I wasn't being evaluated. I was being dismissed. I sat there stunned, trying to continue anyway, trying to sound confident. But every sentence I spoke felt like it was being thrown into a void. I could hear my own voice echo against his silence, each word smaller than the last. I looked around the room, hoping maybe I was wrong. Maybe he was listening. Maybe this was some odd test of poise under pressure. But no. What that 20-minute wait and 5-minute interview told me louder than anything was this in that company under that man. My time didn't matter. My presence didn't matter. And if I accepted the job, I would be starting from a place of silence and erasure. Sometimes 20 minutes is more than a delay. Sometimes it's the whole message delivered loud and clear before you ever open your mouth. He didn't even lift his eyes, just sat there, phone in hand, scrolling. Maybe it was my resume. Maybe it was Instagram. I'll never know. What I do know is that his attention wasn't on me, wasn't even in the room. And you don't need a handbook on professionalism to know how insulting that feels. I had spent the week preparing rehearsing questions, printing out copies of my portfolio, checking every wrinkle on my suit. I arrived early, polished, ready. But the man across from me couldn't be bothered to pretend like I was worth a moment of eye contact. And here's the thing, it's not about ego, it's about respect. Because when someone treats your presence as an inconvenience, it plants a seed of doubt about your value, your time, your dignity. In that moment, I felt invisible, like I could have been anyone, or no one. And that realization hit harder than any tough interview question ever could. At one point mid-sentence I paused. He was still scrolling, not even a nod to acknowledge I was speaking. I looked at him and said, calmly but clearly, "Sorry, that's incredibly rude." He finally looked up, confused, maybe surprised I had said anything at all. "I was reviewing your resume," he mumbled, as if that excused it. "I'm not a fresh college grad desperate to impress. I'm a seasoned professional. I've led teams, delivered results, mentored junior staff. And yet, here I was being treated like background noise, like a placeholder in his schedule. That's when I realized this wasn't just a bad interview, it was a preview of how this workplace valued people, of how that manager viewed those beneath him, of how invisible I'd be if I said yes. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't make a scene, I simply stood up, shook his hand and said, "Thank you, but I think we're done here." He blinked, not angry, not apologetic, just surprised. Like the idea of someone turning down his attention was new to him. I walked out with my dignity intact. Because when someone holds their phone tighter than they hold a conversation, you don't stick around to be part of the feed. You move on toward people who see you, not just skim you. It took just one sentence to snap the silence between us. "Sorry, that's incredibly rude." That's all I said. No shouting, no dramatics. Just truth steady and clear, like the sound of a pin dropping in a quiet room. The moment those words left my mouth, the atmosphere shifted. He looked up finally, and for the first time during the entire interview, we made eye contact. Except, it wasn't connection, it was confusion. Like no one had ever called out his behavior before. Like my expectation for basic respect was foreign. He blinked and said, "I was reviewing your resume," as if that made it okay. As if professionalism could be downloaded through a glowing screen instead of shared face-to-face. But that's the moment I knew I couldn't work there. Because one sentence, my sentence, was the only moment in that room where I felt heard, and I had to be the one to demand it. It wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about making a scene. It was about making a choice. I looked him in the eyes and said calmly, "Thank you, but I think we're done here." And that was it. No further explanation, no salvaging. I stood up, shook his hand, not out of respect for him, but to keep my own, and walked out. It's funny how one sentence can carry the weight of years. Because in that moment, it wasn't just about the interview. It was about every time I had been overlooked in a meeting spoken over in a boardroom, or told to be patient when patience was code for accept being dismissed. It's empowering in the most unexpected way to realize you can say no. To walk away not because you're afraid you won't get the job, but because you know you deserve better than what's being offered not on paper, but in the room, in the tone, in the way they look at you, like you matter. One sentence. That's all it took. Sometimes it doesn't take a raised voice to reclaim your worth. It takes a quiet boundary spoken with conviction, and it stays with you not just in the moment, but long after you've walked out the door. The drive home didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a victory lap. I didn't land a job that day, but I did something bigger. I protected my dignity. As I pulled onto the highway, the silence in the car was loud, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. It wasn't the silence of regret or self-doubt. It was the kind of quiet that comes after making a decision rooted deep in self-respect. I rolled down the window, let the wind in, and felt every mile take me farther from that glass office and closer to the version of myself I refused to compromise. I kept replaying the moment I stood up and ended that interview. Not with anger, not with dramatics, just with clarity. I had dressed for that role I had prepared, I had done the hard work. But what I walked away with wasn't a paycheck. It was proof that I'm done begging for basic respect. And that kind of clarity, that's priceless. It struck me how many of us have been taught to swallow mistreatment because the opportunity looks shiny on paper. We're taught to nod, to smile, to push through, because this could be your big break. But at what cost? That's when I realized the real test wasn't whether I'd impress him. It was whether I'd respect myself enough to not need to. A few minutes into the drive, my phone buzzed, probably a follow-up from the recruiter, maybe even an apology. I didn't check it. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need validation. Not anymore. You don't need to accept a seat at every table just because it's offered, especially if that table's built on disregard. So, yeah, no job offer. But I got something else that day, something better. I got to remind myself of the kind of professional and person I am, one who shows up on time, looks people in the eye, and doesn't stay in rooms where they won't do the same. And with every mile on that road, I wasn't leaving behind an opportunity. I was driving towards something I didn't even realize I needed. Self-worth unshaken. And damn, that felt like winning. They always say the same thing, don't they? Don't take it so personally. Or, my favorite, you're being too sensitive. That's what came next. Not from strangers, but from people I expected better from. Friends, former colleagues. One even laughed and said, "You walked out of a whole interview just because he was on his phone, like I'd stormed out over spilled coffee or a crooked necktie." But this wasn't about a phone. This was about presence. About the fact that I had shown up prepared, hopeful, and deeply invested in a conversation that the other person didn't even bother to look up for. Let me ask you something. If a man shows up for a date and the woman stares at her phone the whole time, wouldn't we call that rude? If a teacher ignored a student mid-sentence, wouldn't we say that student deserves better? Why does the setting of a job interview suddenly make it okay to accept less? Here's what most people don't understand. Being sensitive isn't the problem. Accepting disrespect in silence is. I wasn't too emotional. I wasn't overreacting. I was setting a boundary, a clear one that said, I will not pour effort into someone who can't give me their eyes for 5 minutes. And in a world that's grown numb to that kind of basic courtesy, maybe that kind of clarity does look bold, maybe even threatening. But here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. Speaking up makes people uncomfortable, not because you're wrong, but because they're used to people staying quiet. So, yeah, I've been called too sensitive. And if that means I care about being heard, seen, and treated with mutual respect, then I'll wear that label like a badge. Because being too sensitive got me out of a room where I never belonged. It protected me from a boss who might have disrespected me for years, not just minutes. And it reminded me that dignity is a deal breaker no matter how high the salary. Let the world call it sensitive. I call it self-respect. And that's not something I'll ever apologize for. You hear it all the time on company websites. We value professionalism, we foster respect, we promote excellence. The buzzwords roll off the page like a mission statement built by a focus group. But what does any of that mean when the person representing the company can't even look you in the eye? See, professionalism isn't about suits or titles or how many acronyms you stack behind your name. It's not about corporate jargon or rehearsed pleasantries. It's about presence, decency, the ability to make another human being feel like their time matters. And on that day in that interview room, none of that showed up. The man who was supposed to be my direct superior couldn't be bothered to greet me properly. He arrived late without apology thumb, still scrolling on his phone when I started speaking. No acknowledgement, no curiosity, no respect. Just the flicker of a screen and the steady hum of indifference. I used to think professionalism was something you earned through degrees, years of experience climbing that invisible ladder, rung by rung. But I'm starting to realize it's something you reveal in the way you treat people when nobody's watching, and especially when you think they can't do anything for you. It's easy to act courteous when you're the one with something to prove, but real professionalism that shows in how you treat the people sitting across from you, especially the ones applying to join your team, to contribute to your company, to invest their energy and talent into your mission. That day I saw a title on a resume, and nothing behind it. No integrity, no leadership. Just a man playing a role he'd stopped caring about. And the irony. Had he looked up, had he shown me 5 minutes of real attention, I probably would have worked my heart out in that role. I probably would have brought everything I had to the table. But he didn't. And that told me everything. So, the next time someone tells you it's just how the industry is, or you have to put up with a little rudeness to get ahead, remember, this professionalism is how you treat people when no one's keeping score. And in that room, the score was clear, and he was already losing. You know what's funny? I walked into that interview thinking I was the one being evaluated, that I had to prove myself, my skills, my experience, my worth. But as I sat there across from someone who couldn't even give me the basic decency of eye contact, something in me shifted. I realized this wasn't just about a job. This was about my self-respect. And no title, no paycheck, no fancy company name is worth shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's indifference. Too many of us have been taught to endure, to smile politely through disrespect, to ignore the red flags because it's just one person, or you really need this opportunity, or you don't want to burn a bridge. But what about the bridges inside ourselves? The ones we quietly set on fire when we let someone treat us like we're invisible. In that room, I remembered every time I'd swallowed my voice to keep the peace. Every time I'd stayed quiet when someone talked over me, disrespected me, or made me feel small just to stay professional. But here's the truth. Real professionalism doesn't mean silence. It means standards. And my standard is this. If you want my labor, my loyalty, and my talent, the least you can give me is your attention. Walking out wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was deliberate. It was me telling myself, I'm done begging for crumbs of respect in rooms where I bring the full table. So, to anyone out there wondering if they're being too sensitive or too proud for choosing themselves over a job that disrespects them, let me say this clearly. You're not. You're brave. You're brave for saying no, for walking out, for deciding that your peace matters more than a paycheck that comes with a side of humiliation. Because a job is just that, a job. But your dignity, that's yours. And you never have to trade it to climb a ladder that doesn't even lead anywhere worth going. And in the end, it wasn't about the job at all. It was about me standing up quietly, calmly, but fully for myself. For the version of me that used to tolerate disrespect. Because I thought that's just how it was. For the younger me, who once would have stayed seated, smiled through it, and walked away, wondering why she felt so small. That day I didn't just leave an interview, I left behind a part of me that used to beg for recognition in rooms that never deserved my presence. We don't always get to control how people treat us, but we do get to decide what we'll accept. And sometimes dignity sounds a lot like the sound of your own footsteps walking away. So, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or disrespected in a room you fought hard to enter, just know you're allowed to walk out. You don't have to stay quiet to be professional. You don't have to smile through disrespect to be grateful. You don't have to prove your worth to someone who never bothered to look up. Because the people who truly recognize your value, they won't make you fight to be treated like a human being. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever been in a room like that, then don't scroll past. Stick around. Because the next story might just be yours. Subscribe for more true stories that remind you your worth is not negotiable.